Hi, my name is Isabel Thomas, and I am the current president for University of Kentucky's Universities Fighting World Hunger chapter. And today is the last weekly meeting, so give yourself a pat on the back. Thank you guys so much for coming. Oops. Sorry. And today we'll be talking about how food insecurity varies throughout the world, which I think is arguably the most important weekly meeting that we've had this semester. So first off, I wanted to start out with just like a general visual statistic. So the number of people who are severely food insecure. So if you remember that triangle, it's the very bottom, the low food insecure or the high food insecure people. So they are lowering the quantity and quality of food, so the amount that they can eat and how many nutrients are in it. So this is by region, 2014 to 2018. Yeah, so if you can see here, here's Australia and New Zealand, the sliver, Europe, Northern America is in red right here, Central America and South America are in orange. But as you can see, the biggest amount of people in who are severely food insecure fall in Asia and Africa. I think Asia most recently took over from Africa is the most people who are severely food insecure by census of population density. But you'd have to check me on that. So world hunger facts. 805 million people are malnourished. So that's 1 in every 9 people living on this planet. Hunger and malnutrition is the #1 cause of death worldwide. So this is more than AIDS, malaria, or tuberculosis combined. And most live in developing countries. So I do think that even though food insecurity in the United States is so prevalent and it needs to be addressed, the majority of people who are living in that really low food secure situation, the people who are really hungry, are in developed countries. So this is the share of the population with moderate or severe food insecurity in 2017. So the darker the red, the more the population. As you can see, we're at around 5%, 5 to 10%. But really, if you're looking at all of Asia, that you're looking at more of the 20 to, or you're looking at 10% to 30% range. And in Africa, you see numbers as high as more than 80, but usually 50 to 80%. So this is where we would talk about why are some countries' populations living with 70+% food insecurity. But we will get into that more. So because this is a video, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. So as I've been saying throughout this series, women and mothers are really affected by food insecurity. So 60% of the world's hungry are women, and there are 240,000 maternal deaths annually. And though that's not entirely attributed to hunger and malnutrition, that does play a large part. And 1 in 6 infants in the world are born with low birth weight. And as we talked about previously, low birth weight sets you up to, and predisposes you to diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, all of these really negative health outcomes. So children, so the other population that is really strongly affected. So 45% of deaths under 5 years old are attributed to malnutrition and hunger. So that's 3.1 million children each year. So about 1 in every 6 children in the world are born underweight, which is 101 million. And then 8,500 children die per day due to malnutrition. So I think that these are some pretty stark facts that need to be addressed. So this is the share of children who were wasted in 2016. So wasted means that the weight is significantly lower than the average of their height. And so this is a consequence of prolonged, so a continuous food shortage and disease. Yeah, think of extremely low birth weights. So as you can see, America is sitting at about 1%. And if you look at across the world, it's about 2.5 to 5%, but really concentrated in Asia and in Africa, you're starting to see numbers like 10 to 20%. 20 to 30%. And I think that that is kind of an incredibly devastating statistic. So now we're gonna watch a short video about just the general state of hunger in the world right now. So this is new, it's from 2020.
We are facing a global fight to address one of the biggest challenges of our time. 5 years after committing to eradicate hunger, we are not on track to reach our goals by 2030.
Chronic hunger is up by 10 million people in 1 year and up by nearly 60 million in 5 years. Almost 690 million people went hungry in 2019, with numbers highest in Asia and rising fastest in Africa.
If these trends continue, more than 840 million people will be hungry by 2030, with Africa overtaking Asia as the region affected most. The COVID-19 pandemic could add over 100 million people to this distressing toll.
Overcoming hunger is just one part of the problem. 2 billion people do not have regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. In 2019, 144 million children under the age of 5 were stunted,
while 47 million were affected by wasting. We are not on track to meet our 2030 targets for child stunting, low birth weight, and exclusive breastfeeding.
Countries are also facing the growing burden of obesity linked to poor quality diets, with 676 million of adults obese.
Around the world, many people are suffering from hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition because they cannot afford healthy diets.
Even the cheapest healthy diets are out of reach for more than 3 billion people in the world. In sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, around 57% of the population cannot afford nutritious food.
Our current dietary patterns are also taking a heavy toll in terms of health costs and the environment. By 2030, diet-related health costs linked to mortality and non-communicable diseases could be more than $1.3 trillion a year, while diet-related costs of greenhouse gas emissions could be more than $1.7 trillion a year.
As the world fights COVID-19, we cannot allow the pandemic to stop the global fight on hunger and malnutrition. To achieve a world free from hunger and malnutrition by 2030, countries must transform food systems and increase the affordability of healthy diets.
Shifting to healthy diets could reduce direct and indirect health costs by up to 97%,
while reducing the social costs of greenhouse gas emissions by up to 74%. We must ensure the cost of nutritious foods comes down.
If the whole world shifts towards a healthy diet, we have a real chance of ending hunger and malnutrition, once and for all.
We must act now to build back better and make a difference in lives and communities everywhere.
So sorry if you heard any background noise. My dog is in here with me, and usually she doesn't make any noise, but she just woke up from a nap. So yeah, I do think that it is important too, like that they mentioned that during the pandemic, we can't stop the fight for hunger because it is a prevalent and ever-present issue. So to go into why food insecurity is prevalent more in some countries than others, I wanted to start by saying, what are these countries that are experiencing a lot of hunger? So the 10 worst food crises in 2019 by number of people. So Yemen being number 1, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Syrian Arab Republic, Sudan, Northern Nigeria, and Haiti are all experiencing a lot of hunger in the world. And usually we would start to like brainstorm about why, but I will kind of move on and talk about why because there's no one here with me. So reasons for severe food insecurity. First one is political instability. So a really good example of this is Ethiopia. There has been riots and a state of fragmentation. And so there's a huge standoff between the people and the government in recent years. And this political instability has really uprooted people from their lives and has has uprooted people from their lives and caused them to go hungry.
Learning. We're also following the latest developments surrounding a major political shakeup in Ethiopia. The country is located in the Horn of Africa. It's considered a key U.S. ally in the region when it comes to fighting terrorism. Ethiopia's prime minister abruptly resigned last week, creating more uncertainty and political chaos across the country. Here to take us through the latest is CBSN contributor Alex Clement. He writes for Signal, a newsletter produced by G0 Media that includes this story and a list of different fascinating global articles every week. You can sign up for it at g0media.com. Just head to the homepage and click subscribe to the newsletter. Alex, welcome.
Good to be here.
So this is a really fascinating story. And I think that for a lot of Americans, they sometimes sort of scratch their heads and say, why are we focusing so much on Ethiopia? But there is an ethnic rivalry happening in that country. The president has resigned, and that country's in turmoil. And why it's important is because it's one of the fastest growing economies in Africa.
It is indeed. This is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. It's the second most populous country in Africa. And as you say, it is a key part of the counterterrorism strategy, particularly with respect to Al-Qaeda affiliated militants in Somalia. It is also, however, a very repressive political system in Ethiopia, and as you mentioned, a very fractured, ethnically very fractured. And since 2015, both of those things have contributed to a massive protest movement. There are the two largest ethnic groups, the Oromo and the Amhara, feel that they've been shut out of political power by the ruling party. And there's been clashes between ethnic groups. At the same time, Ethiopians are frustrated at continued political repression, crackdown on human rights, crackdown on the media, imprisonment of political dissidents. And all of this really came to a head last week when the Prime Minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn, resigned. Now the country is in a state of emergency, and the question is, what happens next?
So Signal reported last month that a bunch of political prisoners were released, and it seemed like things were moving in the right direction. What happened?
Well, the Prime Minister, Haile Mariam, has actually been very weak the entire time he's been in power, since 2012. And this kind of ethnic tensions, he wasn't able to get ahead of that. And despite releasing the political prisoners, the demands from the various ethnic groups are still quite strong. The question is whether the ruling party decides to bring in someone who's more sort of capable of bringing people together, a more inclusive government, or doubles down under influence from the military and says, no, let's crack down even harder to solve this problem. They've been cracking down for 3 years. It hasn't worked. It's only gotten worse.
You know, that country is a sea of stability in an area of Africa that is unstable. South Sudan and Sudan border it, as does Somalia. We all know Al-Shabaab is very active in Somalia. That is why it's so critical and such an important ally of the United States. What is the United States saying about what is happening?
Well, the United States says that the government needs to be more inclusive and more democratic. But the reality is that the United States has found it very useful to be allied with Ethiopia in the counterterrorism fight. There's an intelligence relationship with the Ethiopians that goes back the better part of 2 decades. And, you know, not an unfamiliar story in which backing for counterterrorism enables a government to crack down on its own citizens. So the United States is having to kind of dance this dance again. Do we want stability in the name of counterterrorism, or do we want a more sort of democratic outcome that may undermine stability in the short term?
That's a fascinating discussion, and it's one that, for reasons that are probably too large to discuss in the short term.
So we'll pause it there. But I want to point out this was from 2018. I don't, because my major doesn't really talk a lot about like world conflict going on. I did a lot of this research on my own. If you have any examples that are more recent, please let me know, but I tried to keep it as up to date as possible. So yeah, political instability will cause riots, and it'll cause displacement. And all these countries that we're talking about don't have the welfare system that the United States does. So when people become hungry, they don't have these resources that they're able to access, which causes a real state of crisis. So the second one is wartime and conflict. And so whenever you're talking about war and conflict, you're talking about displacement. And whenever displacement occurs, food insecurity is going to occur, just because people are no longer able to hold on to their jobs, hold on to their normal daily routines. And there's no longer growing, like, farmers are no longer able to produce crops, which leads to food shortages. I think an example that all of us know fairly well is the Afghanistan war. So the next one is negative weather events or catastrophes. This is especially important to talk about now that we're starting to see the negative effects of climate change and global warming. Um, I think I wanted to choose one that a lot of us know. So the Haiti earthquake in 2010. Here's like interviews 10 years later on how it's affected people.
Où le séisme allait se passer. Donc, je revenais de voir mon gynécologue et dans une des structures de la capitale. J'avais un enfant de 3 mois qui était avec moi. Et pendant que je berçais mon enfant, j'ai ressenti les secousses. J'ai entendu un bruit qui avait l'air d'une explosion sous forme de bombe atomique. On ne savait pas quoi c'était. C'est au deuxième secousse qu'on a pu voir que c'était un tremblement de terre. À ce moment dans ma tête, je m'étais dit une seule chose. Si 5 minutes, je me vois encore là, je suis en vie. Quand ça s'était arrivé, tout de suite après, j'ai dû laisser la maison pour sortir sur la rue. Et j'ai passé environ 1 mois sous les tentes parce que j'avais peur de rentrer, de dormir sur les bétons de la maison, vraiment. Le lendemain, quand je me rendais à MSF Hollande, sur tout le long de la route, on a vu les dégâts, on a vu les gens qui sont dans les rues, on a vu des cadavres empilés comme ça et dans les rues. Là, c'était un choc. Quand Médecins sans frontières m'a appelé, c'était 1 semaine et demie après le séisme. Donc, j'étais en province et j'ai dû rentrer pour rejoindre l'équipe de santé mentale. Ce fut une journée assez difficile parce qu'il y avait trop de souffrance. Souffrance des enfants qui ne pouvaient pas accepter cette perte, perdre leurs membres, perdre une bonne partie de leur corps. Médecins sans frontières, après le tremblement de terre, était vraiment l'une des premières organisations qui a pu intervenir rapidement pour aider les victimes. On avait Médecins sans frontières France, qui était déjà là sur le terrain, qui faisait la traumatologie, prise en charge des gens, de ces victimes-là.
So I think that kind of goes to show how long-standing something like a natural disaster can affect people. Not only just like the loss of arms and legs, which of course reduces your ability to work and how long you can work and what you can do, but the mental impact. It's going to be hard for anyone to rebuild their entire life again after something like that happens, as well as the common word that you'll hear through all of this, displacement and just loss of production. So this definitely has huge implications now and unfortunately in the future. So the next one we're going to be talking about is economic shocks. So again, in a lot of these countries where there are like a lot of economic shocks, the most recently COVID-19, there is little governmental aid. So there's no welfare, there's no SNAP, no WIC, nothing that can really help people get back on their feet as far as hunger goes. An example of this is northern Nigeria. I couldn't find a great video that ties all of this together. I'm going to show you one that I thought was pretty good. But it caused a collapse. There was a collapse in democracy, and this led to a collapse in the world oil prices, which led to led to a lot of people losing their jobs or reduced wages. And this was a huge economic shock, which put so many people into pretty extreme poverty.
It is a ranking no country wants, a first place position for the most people living in extreme poverty. Nigeria has now overtaken India in the less than envious top spot. But it is Africa's second largest economy and oil rich. So for a land so richly blessed, Why are Nigerians not reaping the benefits of the wealth? Extreme poverty means people surviving on less than $1.90 a day. In Nigeria, it grows by 6 people every minute. 87 million Nigerians, or nearly 50% of the population, live below the breadline. The figures come from the World Poverty Clock. It is counting down to 2030, measuring progress on the UN's major sustainable development goal to eradicate poverty worldwide.
The problem literally grows every day. Our population happens to be the largest in Africa and one of the largest in the world. And in the next 2 decades, we will be, some say the 4th, some say the 3rd most populous country.
Nigeria's government rejects the data modeling by the World Poverty Clock, but there is no denying the country's inequality. Extreme wealth is in the hands of a few. And despite being the largest oil producer in Africa, successive Nigerian governments have struggled to lift living standards. President Muhammadu Buhari took office in 2015, vowing to improve the lives of ordinary citizens. But the manufacturing, transportation, and agriculture sectors have not recovered from the 2016 recession after a drop in oil prices. The unemployment rate is at 19%. The youth rate is 33%. Buhari's anti-corruption campaign has clawed back $1.6 billion in misused funds. But his critics argue that barely scratches the surface. And although he's credited with pushing back the terror group Boko Haram, insecurity persists in the northeast.
The fact is the battle against poverty in Africa and the world cannot be won unless there is progress in poverty reduction in Nigeria.
So I think that this one kind of hits close to home to me. I was able to go to a study abroad trip to Ghana, which is right next to Nigeria. And of course, a completely different political infrastructure and things like that. I don't want to say that they're the same country, but there was like this similar disenfranchisement with the government, and and there is a lot of corruption that happens when you do try and make welfare systems. So in tandem with economic shocks and little support to back them up, like little government aid, causes a huge increase in extreme poverty and therefore hunger. So, and then this is just to show poverty in Nigeria by region. So North versus South. The South has significantly lower statistics, and this is due to certain government aid and how it functions and how it works and the corruption within the government, and the economic shocks that were felt, like such as the oil crisis. So all of that combined. So usually when people are talking about poverty in Nigeria, they're talking about northern Nigeria. So then I think this is one of the last ones, but discrimination and respect. So whatever that may be, race, gender, ethnicity, age. When we're talking about extreme poverty, a lot of times we're talking about gender. And there's a huge lack of respect and a huge amount of discrimination in pretty much all of these countries that are in the top 10. And then this leads to a reduction in education, credit, employment power. A lot of women still aren't able to get go to a bank, for example. They're not able to get employed. They have no power in the familial structure. They're not able to go to any higher education or maybe even primary or secondary concerns. The other one that I want to point out is ethnic conflicts. So I think, for example, in Ethiopia, they said that they had 4 different types of ethnicities that were all kind of battling against each other. We see this in a lot of countries, not just the ones that we're talking about here, but ethnic conflicts can lead to displacement and can lead to feuding, loss of jobs, loss of agricultural production, which leads to an increase in hunger. So to this one, I wanted to focus on Yemen gender roles just because it's so shocking.
A few days of tranquility for Suha Basharan. She's far from her war-torn homeland of Yemen.
It's also kind of relaxing to be in a calm country and with no worries, and you walk peacefully around at any time of the day.
Basharan is a women's rights activist with the aid organization CARE. A long-awaited visa has allowed her to visit Berlin for a few days to appeal to German politicians to take more of an interest in her home country. She's trying to improve women's rights in a place where civil war has raged for years and 80% of the population depends on humanitarian aid. Her task is becoming more difficult.
When the priority is to find food and you don't know from where your second meal is coming, to talk about rights, people's like, feed me first and then talk about rights.
Discrimination against women is worse in Yemen than anywhere else in the world, according to the Global Gender Gap Report. Equal rights activists cite child marriages, female genital mutilation, and domestic violence. They want to at least give women their voice, but sometimes war presents opportunities.
It kind of open windows of opportunities for women because families who lost their breadwinner, the man, who will stand? Women stood for their families, and you find now a lot of women, and they use their traditional role, their traditional skills in cooking, in sewing, and they turn it into business, which is a big achievement for women.
Before leaving Berlin, Suha Basharan is hoping the German government will agree to put more pressure on the warring parties. It might help end the conflict there and ensure her children can one day live in a peaceful Yemen.
So yeah, I think like the gender gap is huge in Yemen, and not only Yemen, but a lot of other countries as well. And that leads to a lot of political instability and of course hunger, like, because as we talked about, children and women are most likely to face food insecurity. And so finally, the main cause of food insecurity is poverty. So the core cause, and here we're going to see a little bit about the Democratic Republic of the Congo, because it is the poorest country in the world, and how poverty has affected food insecurity in that country.
What do you really need to know about the Congo? It's the greatest single example in history of how predatory elites rip off millions of people and get away with it. Congo is one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world. It's got gold, diamonds, copper, uranium, cobalt, and coltan, which you use every day. It's in mobile phones, laptops, even jet engines. There's estimated to be more than $24 trillion worth of mineral wealth under Congo's soil. So why are its people some of the poorest in the world? It starts with the story of a great crime. Back in 1885, a king in search of an empire created a state the size of Western Europe. King Leopold of Belgium drew borders through ancient kingdoms, forcing 450 different ethnic groups into a new state. Leopold's plunder of the natural resources caused as many as 10 million deaths. It sparked the world's first human rights campaign, which forced the king to hand over the country to the Belgian state. But Congo remained a place where the white man dominated and exploited. Enter a new hope for Africa.
Nous avons connu les ironies, les insultes, les coups que nous devions subir matin.
The independence leader, Patrice Lumumba, inspired millions across the continent, but the West saw Lumumba as an enemy. The Belgians supported a rebellion against the new government in the mineral-rich east of the country. And when Lumumba appealed to the Soviet Union for help, the Belgians conspired with the CIA to murder him. It paved the way for the 3 decades-long rule of President Mobutu. They didn't come any greedier in Africa. It's estimated he stole around half of the $12 billion his country received in aid. The West helped to keep him in power. A people and a country finally breaking under the strain of 26 years of autocratic and brutal dictatorship. But Mobutu's era ended in the most unexpected of ways. Genocide in Rwanda, the country next door, saw millions flee into Congo. War followed them. Rwanda and Uganda sponsored a rebellion that overthrew Mobutu and installed the Kabila family in power. In a decade of war, more than 5 million people are estimated to have died. 9 African nations and numerous rebel groups fought each other for territory, for control of Congo's riches. Warlords dominated swathes of the country. The word used to describe you is warlord, not peacemaker, warlord. I'm not a warlord. It always comes back to the money.
We're going to make some history together today.
With the tech boom of the new millennium, Congolese coltan was in high demand.
As there is a new commodity that we all want for our mobile phones or for our electric vehicles, the reality often is that Congo has it. And so we start to see the unscrupulous businessmen and women. We start to see the corrupt leaders.
Human rights groups allege that around $750 million in mining revenues has been stolen under the rule of President Joseph Kabila and his cronies. Congo is a country where more than 70% of the population lives below the poverty line, where women suffer some of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world, and human rights can often be abused with impunity.
This soil on which we sleep is the same soil where we buried our children.
Such suffering isn't the natural condition of these people, it's man-made, and that is the tragedy of Congo. The current president, Joseph Kabila, has stayed in power beyond the 2 terms allowed to him under the constitution. But something new and big has been happening in Congo.
They're protesting, they're organizing, they're using social media in a way we've never seen before.
Are you afraid of the state?
No, jamais.
The nation now waits to see if President Kabila will try to cling to power or hold free elections. The fate of 78 million people hangs in the balance. Congo's history, though, makes it hard to feel optimistic. If only Congo's vast natural resources could be used for the benefit of all its people.
I think that this is a good video to end because it brings in all of the other things that we talked about. Poverty never just occurs out of nowhere. There's always causes that cause it. You saw discrimination. You saw that there was economic shocks. You didn't see weather, but wartime and conflict, political instability, and a lot of displacement. So I think, okay, so I want to do a note on generalization like I always do and state that there are very happy people living in these countries and and there is an upper, middle, and lower class. And just because someone is poor does not mean that they can't live a quality and life. But that being said, no one wants people to live in extreme poverty, and no one wants that for themselves, so why would you want it for others? And it does make it significantly harder to live a fulfilling life and healthy and live to the lifespan that you should. So that's it on generalization. And then I kind of wanted to tie it together by saying hunger hurts us all. I know it's so easy to say like, oh, hunger's across the world. Oh, hunger is, in another part of town, in another country, in another, whatever it may be. But the reality is that you meet, see, or know people every single day who are food insecure. And as we've seen with this pandemic, that can have huge consequences. It leads to an increased world vulnerability to common illness, an increased vulnerability in times of disaster, and it leads to impediments on world economic growth. And so I believe this, and I know it to be true, that hunger can be eliminated, and personal ways to help do make an impact. Awareness, education, volunteering, monetary or food donations, and advocacy are all such good ways on a personal level to help those in need. So that's it. Thank you so much for choosing to be here with me, and I hope you learned something.